the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay. Shabbat Shalom to our subscribers. Here we are again. It's another Shabbat. We look forward to it every week. It's a time of just being renewed, refreshed, and restored. And to refocus what's really important in life. Where we should be putting our energies and our time. And what's most important. So, our Parashah study for today is in Bereshit, Genesis. It's Bereshit 25, chapter 25, 19 to chapter 28, 9. And the Parashah title is Tol'dot. So we're going to have a history lesson today. Okay, a little bit of history. And the Parashah basically covers the birth of Esau and Jacob. And where Esau sells his birthright. You all have a birthright. Men, the male in the family, that's just the patriarchal culture of society. The firstborn male receives the birthright and the inheritance and the responsibility to lead the family when the patriarch passes on into the next world or returns to the real world. And so, verse 19, Yitz'chak, who is the son of Abraham, was 40 years old when he got married, or when Rivkah came into his life. And last Shabbat we talked about marriage and everything, and I think at that time the structure and order of becoming married is nothing like what we think today. Okay, there's a shadow of it, but as we see from last week, Abraham sent out his servant to acquire a wife for Yitz'chak. And it was very specific, his instructions on how to go about that. And I find it interesting, he didn't send his son to a dating agency. He didn't send himself to a bar or a nightclub or some kind of, group thing. He sent his servant to the people that characterized the elements that Abraham was well acquainted with because of his family. Back to the land of where he had come from. So there is a connection there. He warned his servant to not go amongst the Canaanites, which is what Esau, when it came to Esau and Jacob, Esau married a Hittite and an Ishmaelite. So we get into the birthright there and how God constructed that. But this also covers where Isaac and Abimelech have their confrontations. Okay? nothing short of life has its conflicts, doesn't it? Whether we like it or not, it's part of the journey. And why is that? Really at the foundation, why is that? All the things we go through in our lives, why? What's behind it? What's driving it? What is guiding it? We read in the previous chapters when God told Avram to take Isaac and offer him up as a sacrifice, God came right out and said, I'm testing you. I'm testing you. It's so easy to become despondent and disappointed, and some people get depressed, sad. We always got to keep in the back of our mind, this is all temporary. It's all temporary. And God's more interested in your eternity than He is your present condition. It's the things that we encounter and walk through here that God uses to prove and test us. He uses the fallen and broken world to bring glory to His name in standing with us and by us as we go through. What does it say in Yeshayahu? When you go through the water, I'll be with you. When you go through the fire, I'll be with you. If we keep trying to minimize or eliminate the test, how is Jehovah going to prepare us for eternity? That's what's more important. I just, I look at, I'm just as, how should I say? When God, when? When is my one ear going to get straightened out? When is my health going to be restored? Well, guess what? God has that all under control. The essence of our trusting Him is when it just doesn't bother us anymore. It's like, when it happens, it happens. I can't tell you how many times I've had hands laid on me and prayed for since I was 8 for my ears to be healed. I don't have an eardrum here. I got a hole in this eardrum here. Some people say I have a hole in my head, but I don't think so. But I don't need to say when God anymore. I gave that up a long time ago. I just trust Him. When He needs me to have all the faculties whole and complete, they will be. It's that simple. It's like when Yeshua went to the Roman centurion that asked him to come and heal his I believe it was his son. What did the centurion say to him? No, you don't have to come. Just say the word and it'll be done. He had faith. Father, just when it's time, it'll happen. And until then, I'm just going to worship and praise you and give thanks. Because that's the character and nature of a Jew. And if you're a believer and a Gentile and you embrace Torah, your heart is circumcised. That's the real covenant of the circumcision. Then it'll happen. It will happen. And so we see in this Parashah, and I think this is really important, okay, that in Yitz'chak's life, we see how he flows with what God is doing. And there's elements here that illustrate to us the mechanics of flowing in the will of God. I see it in the life of Abraham. I see it even more in the life of Yitz'chak. And where is that? Okay? Yitz'chak, in verse 21, it says, Yitz'chak prayed to Adonai on behalf of his wife. So, to all of you who are married, there's an example. Pray to Yehovah on behalf of your wife, because why? Why? She has needs. She has some needs that you can't meet. She was childless. And what happened? Yitz'chak prayed. Yehovah heeded his prayer. He responded. And Rivkah became pregnant. Unfortunately, however, she didn't realize what she was in for. Because it says that the children fought with each other inside her womb so much that she said, if this is what it's going to be like, why go on living? Can you imagine that? You endeared your husband. I'm childless. In that culture, having children is very important. It's a sign of God's blessing on you, God's favor with you. And it's interesting that not the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, well, not Jacob, but at least the first two, they were barren. Sarah and Rivkah. And Jacob made up for all that. So, but then again, he had 4 wives, so, made it a little easier for him. So, but, so Rivkah, focusing on her pain and her disappointment, did she complain? Yeah, I think she probably was distraught because she didn't have children yet. And so Yitz'chak responded, sought God, God responded, and she became pregnant. And then when she got pregnant, she was upset because it was such a struggle, because these 2 children were fighting in her womb. It's kind of like what's at the WWF, where they're in a cage and there's 2 guys in there fighting. I wonder how close it was to that. Grabbing his heel. So it gives you a little bit of an example of, tight space. And lovingly, God responded by saying, there's 2 nations in your womb. incredible. See, God wasn't interested in what was in her womb, but the purpose for which there were 2 children in her womb. God was unfolding his plan for mankind. And they were the instruments through which that was going to come. They didn't realize it. They didn't see thousands of years down the road of who Esau and Jacob would become. It's fascinating. And I say this, the struggles that we have in the Middle East started right here. I mean, let's be real. They were at one another in the womb. And it says that they will be 2 rival peoples. And they still are today. Like, it's not that complicated. It will be that way until the Mashiach comes. And we just got to do our best to work through it. It's that simple. But what really stands out here, God's word is true. It says, one of these peoples will be stronger than the other. Wow. Interesting. I wonder what that means. And the older will serve the younger? How'd that happen? I thought the older one is the birthright and the inheritance one, and to take the place of the patriarch when he passes on. So we got to ask ourselves, what happened? Well, we see that there was a clear distinction between Esau and Jacob. Now, isn't it interesting? They were both Jews. They were both Hebrews, right? Esau wasn't an Arab, and Jacob, wasn't a Gentile. They were both from the line of the patriarchs, Abraham, Yitz'chak, and then we move on. So instead of being confounded by the circumstances, we ought not to be looking at our circumstances, but at what is it that Yehovah is doing? Because he's in charge. It says in Job 1, I believe 21, the plans of Yehovah will not be thwarted. It's that simple. In your life, in my life, in your life, his plan, he has a plan for you. It says it. And I say this over and over again here. Okay? Yehovah, the Creator, said, I knew you when you were in your mother's womb, and I planned out every day of your life, and I planned it out so meticulously that I wrote a book about it. And the name on that book is Jose, Renier, Rabbi Moshe, and Jacob, which would become Israel, and Sean, which my name was then given to me, Moshe. Okay, so it's kind of interesting. So if we could only look at that from the perspective of saying, God, what is your plan? What is it that you're doing? It might help us to make peace a lot easier, because instead of putting the onus on the other brother, and the other brother putting the onus on the other brother, we really ought to be looking to Jehovah, the Creator. What is it that is His plan, not ours? And we got to look at how that is unfolding according to what's been written. And so we see that Esau was a skilled hunter and an outdoorsman. Now, who do you think was the stronger one here? Esau. Everybody loves a hunter and an outdoorsman. Go for the gusto. It's like the Navy SEAL. Really, the go-get-em guy. But Yitz'chak was the timid one, the mama's boy. But you always got to watch out for mama's boy. Really, because they're a lot tougher than you realize. At the end of the day, they're a lot tougher than you think. They just are. Have you ever been in a neighborhood where a mama's boy, he was just, he didn't, raise his ire at things, but boy, if you backed him in a corner, you better watch out, because it ain't going to be pretty. So, something to think about. And so we see that being a hunter, Yitz'chak favored Esau, and Rivkah favored Yaakov. And we see one day that Yaakov was cooking some stew, and Esau came in from the open country exhausted and said to Yaakov, "Please, let me gulp down some of that red stuff." That red stuff. He had to say it twice. "I'm exhausted," he said. This is why he was called Edom, meaning red. The soup must have been red. I don't know. Lentils are red, perhaps? Okay. And Yaakov answered him. Now, we know that Esau meant red. And let's see, where do I have that here? Okay. Esau is then called completely formed, having hair already, which was red. And Jacob was holding Esau's heel on the way out, and he was called quiet man. And so Jacob, being the supplanter, do you know what it means to be a supplanter? Do you know what that word supplanter means? It means to replace. So how, we hear this word sometimes to mean more like he was kind of mischievous and had his way about deceiving, but if you look up the word supplanter, it simply means to replace. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes things need to be replaced. And so Jacob goes to Esau, yeah, I'll give you some soup, but first you got to sell me your rights as the firstborn. Now, we all know that things happen in our lives that happen for a reason. It brings out our character and our nature. It exposes who we really are. in a tight situation. The choices and the judgments we make in that situation. And so Jacob saw an opportunity, and it's interesting that inclination probably was there because they were fighting in the womb. And they were jockeying to who would come out first back then for who would become the birthright. And who was the stronger? Esau. He pushed him out of the way. And Jacob grabbed a hold of his heel and said, "No, you're not going out first." But he did. But that sensibility carried on. I mean, let's be real. Children in the womb are affected by what's going on in the world, in a family, even before they're born. And so Jacob tells him, "First sell me your rights as the firstborn." And Esau's response, now this is the strong man, just came in from the field, and he responds to Jacob by saying, "Look, I'm about to die." That was his response. "Look, I'm about to die," said Esau. "What use to me are my rights as the firstborn?" Is this showing some character? Is this showing what he's really made of? Is it showing there was impulsiveness there? An inability to wait, to think clearly. Is there a correlation between the first fruits of the resurrection and the rights of the firstborn? Just something to think about. Yaakov said to Esau, "First swear to me." So he swore to him, thus selling his birthright to Yaakov. And Yaakov gave him bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, got up and went on his way, and he didn't even think about it. It didn't mean anything to him. I got my food, I'm okay now, I'm not going to die. And he just went on his way, not even thinking about what he just did. Gave up his birthright. He swore an oath. And at that time, in that culture, an oath was an oath was an oath. You don't go back on an oath. And in the Torah, we will see through the oncoming Parashahs, some of the mitzvot, the commandments, are about taking an oath. So what happened there? Can we become so caught up in the conquests of our own desires that we lose sight of the value of what is important to Jehovah? Let me say it again. Can we become so caught up in the conquests of our own desires that we lose sight of the value of what is important to God? You see, we're here, and it's His design, His master plan. He is the grand architect, and He created us to help Him build His kingdom. Not our kingdom, His kingdom. And And when we get caught up in our own desires of building our own kingdom, that's when we go awry. And we don't partake of the benefits of the blessings of Jehovah in our lives. You see, whether we like it or not, it's going to be Jehovah's way, because he has a plan. You can either follow what he's written in his book concerning all the days of your life and be in harmony with him, or you can do your own thing. And we all know where that leads. But our desires, what we want, overrides what we sensibilities. And so now we see the foibles of this interaction between Esau and Jacob, and we come to chapter 26 where we see how Isaac was handling the situation. Now remember, Isaac was God's chosen one to be a shadow of the sacrificial Messiah. That's who God chose to bring forth the line and acknowledgement of the Messiah. Doesn't mean anyone else born of Abraham was any less. He just was gifted with something other than becoming the Messiah or the line of the Messiah. That's all. Do we let our egos go astray? You know? Do we have to be the first at the top of the game, the first in line, the first to get, the first to have? You know, a little bit of humility goes a long way. And so a famine comes over the land where Yitz'chak is and the children, as the first famine that Abraham experienced, which had taken place when Abraham was alive. So, what does a famine interpretively represent in Yitzchak's life here? Are you with me? What does a famine interpretively represent in Yitzchak's life here? Well, it would be no different than today if there's a recession. What does the recession characterize? The flow of resources, money, orders, okay, begins to dry up. What was the cultural economic model at that time? It was an agrarian culture. Okay? When a famine comes, everything gets squeezed. Water, cattle, sheep, grains, everything. So their economy was based on those things. Same thing here. We can experience a famine regardless of whether we have water or not. We can have an economic famine. It has the same effects upon us. Okay? The conditions, and this is really important. Again, who are you looking at? Is it God's plan or your plan? Because The conditions in the physical realm, as in an economic famine, in the physical realm play a role in Jehovah directing our lives. I'm here today because of the Great Recession of 2010 and 2011. I became a rabbi. My life and my business had been totally brought to almost a halt. And I could no longer provide adequately for my family. Fortunately, it survived at such a meager sustenance for a time, and then it went back up a little bit, and then it leveled off, and then it just slowly went away. Because the economic famine and the changes in the economy affected my life. But did I see that as all those people that caused this and did that? No. I was like, God, what are you doing? Well, I began to see that God was moving me in a different direction. And I had to respond. I won't go into the details of all that, but I just want you to know when things become disrupted, and as in Isaac, a famine takes place, we want to see how Yitz'chak responded to the famine. And this is where I said earlier in my message that God uses these things to bring about His purposes in our life. Amen?
Amen.
And so, this is the model that God is showing to us how He works in our life. Yitz'chak went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. Because of the famine. Seeking help to know, because he was living within the boundaries of Abimelech's kingdom. And there was some turmoil between Abimelech's people and Isaac. Isn't that interesting? It already existed, but it became magnified and illustrated through through Esau and Jacob. And so God appears, Ra'ah, which if you heard my message 2 parshas ago on the appearing of, at the Oaks of Mamre, the 3 angels that appeared. Were they all angels? That's the question. And so the same word there, appeared, is the same word here with Isaac, Ra'ah. And we talked last time about how that word Ra'ah has a plethora of meaning to it. It doesn't necessarily mean that Jehovah physically appeared. It could have been a vision. It could have been something that Isaac, an impression that just kind of magnified in his thoughts. It could have been the Rivkah Kadesh giving Isaac some clarity in his mind by seeing certain things. So don't necessarily take it as it was a physical appearance. But this is what Jehovah said to Isaac. Now, does anybody remember what Abraham did when they had the famine? What did he do? He went to Egypt. And that's a whole nother conundrum of what happened in Egypt with Sarah and, oh, she's my sister. He told him she was his sister when she was his wife. But this time, God said to Isaac, don't go down into Egypt. Now think of the illogicness of God saying this to him. If there's things in your life that God's telling you to walk in, and you say, well, that doesn't make any sense, God. If you have a Greek mindset, you're going to say, logic, check this off, check this. God doesn't work that way all the time. God sees the whole view. Because we have a famine, and God says, don't go to Egypt, stay here. Stay here in the famine. But live where I tell you. Are you living where God's told you to live? Or are you living where you want to live? That's the question all the time. Really. If you're living where God wants you to live, there's going to be blessing. But if you're living where you want to live, you're gonna struggle. You're gonna encounter challenges. God said to Isaac, stay in this land. Now here's the promise. Live here, despite the famine. Don't go down into Egypt, which doesn't make any sense. And I will be with you and bless you. You see, sometimes we want to go where we see the blessing by the elements and the structure of where we would go are more, appear to be more, have greater potential for prospering. It's a logical, assessment. But what God just told Isaac to do is illogical. Don't go to Egypt. Live where I tell you. Stay in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. So what God is illustrating here, it's what He wants us to do. If we're plugged into Him, not my will, but thy will be done. God, show me what you're doing so that I can walk in it. Because I don't want to walk where you're not. You see, Isaac walked where God was. It's that simple. Did Abraham walk where God wasn't when he went to Egypt? I don't know. I'd have to look at that more closely. But I know he had a lot of problems down there. But God delivered him out of it. You see, this Isaac's obedience was directly tied to God fulfilling His oath to Abraham. How about that? Is who you are and where you're at tied to something that God has planned that will affect somebody else? Or are we just thinking about ourselves? Do you see how important it is to know what God's plan is and what He's doing? And where He's moving you or not moving you? It's the difference between blessing and famine. And that doesn't mean wealth or prospering abundantly. It's just to be blessed comes in many forms. Many forms. Doesn't have to be do, re, mi. And so it says that God says to Isaac, I will fulfill the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. I will give all these lands to your descendants, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth will bless themselves. Do you realize the recognition on Isaac's part of God's instructions to him to where to go, where to live, and where to stay, brought about God's will that affected millions of people. Just one person. So what are we that we're doing? You know, I was just running a business and married, and my 4 kids, they're great. They're grown. They were grown. And you know, just like Lot and Lot's wife, Lot knew to get out of there. But his wife wanted to keep looking back. God told him, don't look back. I'm taking you in a new direction. It's that simple. And what happened to her? She became as hard as salt. Her heart got hardened, and she hardened. Isaac said, I see what you're doing, Lord. Who else do we know that said, I see what my father's doing, and I do it? Did Isaac see what Jehovah was doing and do it in order to procure and secure generations ahead? He wasn't thinking about himself. This is really important. All this is in the portion today. All this is because Abraham heeded, he took seriously what I said and did what I told him to do. He followed my mitzvot, my regulations, my mishpatim, my kokim, regulations, and my teachings. Do you think that handing down of the 10 words on the stone tablets and the 613 mitzvot which followed only came into being during the Exodus? I don't think so. I can show you, and I will as we go forward, where some of the mitzvot were written before the Exodus and made aware and presented to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Do you think they only came into being during the Exodus? From Adam to Abraham, the mitzvot were verbally being handed down to each generation. That is the way in the culture in the Middle East. It's verbally handed down. It's sung. This is interesting because the blessing is here. And I don't want to get into too far into all the things, but you see, Yitz'chak then, now bear in mind, Yitz'chak made the same mistake that Abraham made of telling the king that this was his sister. And so Yitz'chak settled in Gerar, and the men of the place asked him about his wife, and out of fear, he said, she's my sister. If I tell them she's my wife, they might kill me in order to take Rivkah. After all, she's a beautiful woman. But one day, after he had lived there a long time, you know, he can't hide it, Abimelech, king of the Philistines, happened to be looking out his window. I didn't know they had windows back then, but I guess they did. That's the translation. They had an opening. And spotted Yitz'chak caressing Rivkah, his wife. Now, that illustrates simply, basically, Yitz'chak lied. He deceived them. He didn't trust in God. He feared. Isn't that obvious? He feared what would happen to Rivkah. Did he forget that God's his protector? That God is his fortress? That Jehovah and the warrior and guardian angels surround him? Did he forget? Did he have a mental lapse? But it's simply the condition of our fallen state. The sins of the fathers and mothers are passed down to the third and the fourth generation, and we see this happening here. As in Exodus 34, verses 5 to 8. It says, Adonai descended in the cloud, stood with him, Moshe there, and pronounced the name of Adonai, which is Yehovah. We know that it's been revealed and it's been hidden by the rabbis, and now we know it's Yehovah, which in your Bible it might say Yud-Heh Vav-Heh because it didn't have the vowels, but we know that it's Yehovah. Showing is God merciful and compassionate, slow to anger, rich in grace and truth, showing grace to the thousandth generation, forgiving offenses, crimes, and sins. You're here today because somebody in those 1,000 generations was committed to Yehovah. They prayed for you. And God brought you back. That's why you're here. So you can reconnect. We put the Torah scrolls back in the ark, and we sang the Eitz Chaim, bring us back, Lord, and we will come. Renew our days as of old. We're crying out to be brought back and reconnected. Whether you're a descendant of Ishmael or Esau, it doesn't matter. You're connected through Abraham. And that leads me, it says then that, yet not exonerating the guilty, but causing the negative effects of the parents' offenses, to be experienced by the children and the grandchildren, and even by the third and fourth generations. So part of our inheritance is the foibles of our parents, their negative effects, that they made bad choices. We have to break that pattern in our lives and be delivered and come free into really what God wrote in His book about us, that we would be able to walk that out. God gave you a gift and a talent and an ability that is part of, no different than if an architectural firm is building a huge building and he's hiring people of all different trades. If you go off and stop performing your trade the way you know, guess what? You're not honoring the great architect. You're doing your own thing. You probably won't get contracted on the next building because eventually they're going to find out that there's flaws in what you did, and it's going to hurt the kingdom. It's going to hurt the construction of the building. Sooner or later it's going to surface. But it's really interesting. Okay. Now, I want to just veer off just a teeny bit here and point out, and this is, I think it's important, most people don't maybe know this, but there is no single universally agreed upon group of people that can be identified as the modern day Edomites. You know that. And the Edomites come from Esau. He married a Hittite and an Ishmaelite. Okay? Instead, the historical Edomites likely assimilated into various populations, primarily in the ancient Levant region, which today includes modern Syrians, Lebanese, Palestinians, Jews, and Samaritans. So, if you descended from Esau, within the mix of what they've identified, you're directly connected to Isaac, who's directly connected to Abraham. We're all connected, and we ought not to make distinctions and separate ourselves from. We're all of the same family, and we ought to be doing the things to help one another, to encourage one another, to see that each other's needs are met, not to dominate and control and conquer. What good is that? That turns into having slaves. That's not the spirit of the Creator. It's just not. He's not going to allow it to happen, because He created each group of these assimilated groups of tribes or peoples, or, to accomplish certain specific things for His kingdom. And if they're so gravitating towards their own dominance of their identity, of their group of people, they're going to miss what it is that God has created them to do and to be in the grand design of mankind. Now, I heard from a great rabbi, present day. He said the Ishmaelites were supposed to be the group that God designated to surround Israel and be the warriors to protect it. That's an interesting thought. I didn't look into the mechanics of how he concluded that, but modern Jews, some interpretations identify modern Jews as the descendants of the ancient Edomites, while others see Edom as a symbolic name for groups that are historically or ideologically opposed to the Jewish people. A little bit of a historical background. Ancient Edom, the Edomites were an ancient people who descended from Esau, the brother of Jacob, who became an ancestor of the Israelites. They originally occupied the area in and around what is now southwestern Jordan. The migration. Due to political shifts, particularly the destruction of the kingdom of Judah by the Babylonians, many Edomites migrated into southern parts of Judah, becoming known as Idumeans. Idumeans. Over time, everyone assimilated. The Edomites, along with other ancient groups like the Moabites and the Ammonites, were assimilated into the broader population of the Levant. We're so all really connected. It's amazing. I don't mean to... The words of Rodney King have some real value here when he said, "Can we all just get along?" There's some truth to that. Can we all just get along? And so I wanted to point that out because I think it's relevant to Esau and Jacob. And really, again, when we get caught up in all this minutia, we lose sight of what's God's purpose and plan. And we divide, and we cause strife and discord, and that's not God. That's the evil one. And we ought not want any part of it. You see, I want to again just go back to the blessings and the model that Isaac did what God told him to do and what the outcome of that was. It says, Yitz'chak planted crops in that land where God told him to stay in the midst of a famine. Now get this, in the midst of a famine, Yitz'chak planted crops, verse 12, in that land and reaped that year 100 times as much as he had sowed. In a famine? What's going on? God said, I'm going to bless you if you do what I told you to do, because you preserved my oath and my plan in order to bring forth in the stage that you were in, the Mashiach. Really interesting. He saw, understood, and obeyed what Jehovah had revealed, instructed him, and Jehovah blessed him. Did you get that? Isaac saw. So in our own lives, do we see what God is doing? Do we understand what God is doing in our connectedness and the effects of our lives in other people's lives? And do we obey what Jehovah has revealed to us and instructed us in? He did, and Jehovah blessed him. And the byproduct of just having nothing to do with money, but obedience, understanding, seeing, and accepting God's instruction. It says, the man became rich and prospered more and more until he had become very wealthy indeed. He had flocks, cattle, and large household, and the Philistine envied him. Wow. They needed to learn the lesson he learned instead of envying him. Rejoice. So, it also produces something else that's far more valuable than the wealth and the riches. It says in verse 26, chapter 26, this is after Yitz'chak moved to where God told him to move, even though there was a famine. Then Abimelech went to him from Gerar with his friend Achzad and Pichol, the commander of his army. Yitz'chak said to him, why have you come to me, even though you were unfriendly to me and sent me away? They answered, we saw very clearly, they saw, that Jehovah has been with you. So we said, let there be an oath between us. They made peace. Let's make a pact between ourselves and you, that you will not harm us, just as we have not caused you offense, but have done you nothing but good, and sent you on your way in peace. Now you are blessed by Adonai. You see, in Proverbs 16:7, it says, when a man's ways please Yehovah, he makes even the man's enemies at peace with him. The fruit of seeing, understanding, obeying, and allowing God to instruct you produces in your spirit, in your inner man, blessing, prospering, wealth, and even your enemies are at peace with you. I'd encourage you to read the Parashah and ask the Spirit of the Lord to really direct you. You see, in Hebrews, it's interesting, Rabbi Shaul, who was a Pharisee, was a incredibly well-educated rabbi of his time, really in line to lead eventually, but he fell off his horse. And Yeshua appeared to him and said, why are you persecuting me? A great light appeared to him and changed the whole direction of his life. And he wrote on that in Hebrews 11. He says, by trusting Yitz'chak in his blessings over Yaakov and Esau, made reference to events yet to come. Hebrews 12. Understand, these men are writing about, this is like 2,000 years later that rabbis and men of great knowledge are writing about what happened. Just like 2,000 years later now, we're discussing this 4,000 years ago. There's great value here. Hebrews 12, keep pursuing shalom with everyone and the holiness without which no one will see Yehovah. See to it that no one misses out on God's grace, which means unmerited favor. That no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble and thus contaminates many. And that no one is sexually immoral or godless like Esau, who in exchange for a single meal gave up his rights as the firstborn. For you know that afterwards, when he wanted to obtain his father's blessing, he was rejected. Indeed, even though he sought it with tears, his change of heart was to no avail. And I just want to say that the word, I think there's a misunderstanding when people read in the Torah, whether it's Christians or Jews, it says, God hated Esau. I don't think he hated him. I think he loved him. And evidence of that is how he blessed him, even though the anointing, God's plan was to flow through Jacob and the 12 tribes to bring about the nation of Israel. But when you look up that word in the Hebrew, it simply means he detested him. When somebody in the sphere of our lives and influence does something that's detestable, that doesn't mean you hate them. It means that their actions were so repulsive that there's almost a sense of of weeping for their foolishness, for their just not thinking clearly. So I don't believe that Jehovah hated him. I think he, in a way, mourned his making a bad judgment call and decision. But he blessed Esau. Isaac blessed him, and God blessed Esau. We need not forget that. You see, the word Esau, I hate it, is misos, hatred, or to detest, or to love less, because of the foolishness. If you have a foolish son, and you have a son that saw, understood, obeyed, took the instruction, which son are you going to love more? The one that's obedient. Doesn't mean you don't love the other one, but it's like the father's not going to be foolish and mete out blessings when the one son may take them and squander them. We see that in the parable of the prodigal son. No different. You see how these examples just flow together and complement one another and speak the same truth in a different way. So it says that, so we are, let's see, the older, let me go, because this is really important, and I'm going to close with this. At the time set, I will come and Sarah will have a son. This is just Romans 9, verse 9. And even more to the point is the case of Rivkah. For both her children were conceived in a single act with Yitz'chak our father. And before they were born, before they had done anything at all, either good or bad, so that God's plan might remain a matter of his sovereign choice, not dependent on what they did, but on Jehovah who does the calling. It was said to her, the older will serve the younger. This accords with where it is written, Yaakov I loved, but Esau I hated. And look up the Hebrew word there. As I said, misos, to detest or to love less. So are we to say it is unjust for God to do this? Heaven forbid. For to Moshe he says, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have pity on whom I pity. Thus, it doesn't depend on human desires or efforts, but on God who has mercy. Baruch Hashem. To those of you that happen to come across this video and listen, subscribers, and to you, may Jehovah, the Elohim of Shalom, guard your heart and your minds and your emotions, your feelings, your intellect, your thoughts in Messiah Yeshua. And may Jehovah bless you and keep you. May Jehovah make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May Jehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you his shalom. Shabbat shalom. This is Rabbi Moshe from Beit Torah in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania. If you've been blessed, if this has added to your life in some way, praise God. Come visit us if you're moved. We've had people come that have seen us online on our YouTube channel. Come and visit us. Blessing. Shalom.
Hear now, Jacob my servant. Hear now, O Israel. It was I who